Tonight, we pull back a curtain on a fear the Vatican never truly buried, a fear that still lingers in shadowed corridors and sealed chambers. Not a fear of devils or heretics, but of something far more ancient, Egyptian magic. Long before the church took hold, the temples of Egypt safeguarded secrets about the soul, about time, and about the spoken word's power. They called it Heka, the force that could mold reality itself. This wasn't myth, it was method, and it worked. When Christianity spread, this power didn't disappear. It was absorbed, reshaped, silenced, but never destroyed, hidden inside forbidden manuscripts, whispered in chants few were ever allowed to hear, locked away in rooms even bishops could not enter. This story is not fantasy. It's about authority. Because if you could reach the divine without a priest, you didn't need a church. If the soul itself carried power, then no one could rule you, and that was the danger. So before you scroll past and forget, ask yourself, what knowledge was erased, and why does it still provoke fear today? Like this video, subscribe. Because tonight we open a book they tried to erase, words they swore would never surface again. It was meant to stay hidden forever. Yet in 1824, a battered chest arrived at a museum in France, mislabeled, misplaced, nearly forgotten. Inside, wrapped in fraying linen, was a papyrus older than anything in their collection. At first, it seemed unremarkable, but when the first line was translated, everything shifted. It didn't describe gods or funeral rites. It spoke of light, of breath, of a force that could shape existence through sound, less scripture than spellbook. Within days, word reached Rome. Quietly, the Vatican dispatched envoys. Their task, secure the scroll at any cost. By the time scholars returned to examine it, the case was empty. No explanation, no record, just gone. But why? Why would the church covet an old Egyptian manuscript? The answer lies in its contents. It spoke of priests who could command the wind with a whisper, of temples designed to amplify the human voice into raw power, of symbols that weren't merely letters, but instruments. When spoken correctly, they could breach the veil between worlds. This wasn't myth, it was instruction, and that terrified the Vatican. Because if any of it was true, the Egyptians were not just builders of tombs, they were guardians of a knowledge that bypassed faith, knowledge that didn't ask you to believe, but to do, say, the right words in the right way at the right time, and the world itself could shift. The church could not permit that. Not then, not now. Since then, the papyrus has drifted into legend. Archivists whisper of it being sealed deep beneath the Vatican library in a lead case. Others claim fragments were smuggled by monks who couldn't destroy them. Some believe echoes of it still hide in early Christian prayers, disguised beneath Latin phrases, their origins blurred just enough to survive. What is certain is this: it was never meant to surface, and once it did, it vanished again, leaving behind only traces. Strange references in private letters, sketches in forbidden notebooks, and one more curious detail. After it disappeared, the Vatican quietly updated its list of banned works, not with a name, but with a catalogue number, a number that does not exist in any public system. So the question is no longer was it real? The question is, does the church still fear what it reveals? Because if the Egyptians knew how to speak power into being, then everything we've been told about prayer, ritual, and the divine changes. Perhaps the Vatican wasn't shielding us from lies. Perhaps they were concealing a truth we were never meant to utter. There was a time when people gazed at the stars and saw gods with animal faces, not demons, not monsters, but symbols of order, of balance, of mystery. Anubis, the guardian of the dead; Thoth, the keeper of wisdom and writing; Sekhmet, bringer of both healing and destruction. They weren't evil, they were forces of nature, guides, teachers, protectors. But that changed when a new story began to dominate, and those telling it needed to make sure no one looked back. As Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, it faced a challenge. Egypt, a land where religion wasn't belief. It was life itself. Every wall, every scroll, every heartbeat tied to the sacred. Their temples had endured millennia before the first gospel was written. Their gods weren't fading. So the church made a decision. If Egypt could not be erased, it would be recast. And that's what happened. Anubis, the quiet guide of souls, was turned into a demon, his jackal head suddenly made sinister, Set, once a symbol of chaos and transformation, rewritten as evil incarnate. Even Thoth, the god of knowledge, reduced to a shadow in Christian writings. Temples were stripped, statues shattered, their names replaced with words like Satan, Lucifer, devil. But this wasn't just insult, it was strategy. By recasting gods as demons, people were taught not to question, not to understand, but to fear. And it worked. Within generations, entire mythologies dissolved. Sacred signs became warnings. Words once carved in reverence were left unsaid. Yet not all traces vanished. Look closely. Stained glass, manuscripts, hidden corners of cathedrals, winged beings, animal faces, unblinking eyes. They do not belong to Christianity. They are echoes of something older, something the church could not completely erase. Why erase it at all? Perhaps because Egyptian wisdom was dangerous to empire. It taught that power was within, that death was not an end, but a passage, that the divine could be reached without priests or intermediaries. Such ideas did not serve hierarchy. Freedom rarely does. So the gods were branded demons, their wisdom sealed, their stories marked forbidden, but not forever. Today scholars are piecing together what was lost, translating hidden texts, restoring names once spoken with reverence. And the more we uncover, the clearer it becomes. These gods were never evil, they were simply inconvenient. For centuries, Egypt's walls spoke a language no one could read. Symbols of birds, suns and eyes carved in stone. Outsiders dismissed them as decorations or riddles. But they were more dangerous. They were words, and the church wanted them silent. Long before anyone deciphered hieroglyphs, the Vatican declared them sorcery, forbidden, manuscripts destroyed, scholars exiled, libraries burned, not because they feared spells, but memory. Hieroglyphs preserved a history older than scripture. Stories of gods from the stars, ages before Adam, civilizations that lived long before Genesis. If these texts were translated, the official story would unravel. So the church ensured no one could try. For centuries the symbols were mute, until 1822 when Jean-François Champollion cracked the code with the Rosetta Stone. He realized hieroglyphs weren't symbols at all. They were sounds, a living language. And suddenly, Egypt spoke again. What it said shocked the world. Advanced astronomy, precise calendars, rituals of healing and protection, journeys beyond the body, a record of civilizations, far older than any Western text. The fear made sense now. If people could read these walls, they would begin to ask questions about creation, about truth, about what had been erased to make way for a new faith. Even today, some translations remain hidden. Certain tombs are sealed, some passages from papyri never published. So perhaps the question isn't why the church banned hieroglyphs. Perhaps it's what they still don't want us to see. Because every time a wall is read, a piece of the past returns. And one day, when the full story is unlocked, it may not just reshape what we know of Egypt, but of everything. The Egyptians believed words were alive. That to speak a name was to keep it breathing. That erasing a name was to destroy a soul. To speak it again was resurrection. To them, memory was immortality. And that clashed with a faith built on silence and obedience. The church taught that only the word of God held true power. All else was heresy. So Egyptian chants were banned. Coptic prayers destroyed. The idea that words carried force became witchcraft, blasphemy, punishable. Yet behind locked doors, the Vatican studied the very thing it condemned. Latin became sacred, prayers structured with precision, chants woven into ritual, silence made holy, because they knew words do change reality. And even today you feel it, a lyric that lingers, a sentence that stings, a name that revives memory. This is not superstition. It is connection. It is intention. It is old. Maybe that's why they feared it. Not because it was false, but because it was true. The Egyptians carved a resurrection spell into their Book of the Dead centuries before Christianity. It spoke of the soul rising, the body awakening, light breaking through darkness, a judgment before the divine, and eternal life. Sound familiar? To the first translators, it felt like déjà vu. But how could Egyptians write of resurrection? Long before the Gospels, the Church had no answer. So the text was avoided, passages unpublished, pages missing, the spell now known as Spell 68, reduced to whispers. Yet the truth emerged. The Nile carried resurrection stories carved in stone, long before they were told in Jerusalem. This doesn't disprove Christianity, but it does suggest something else. That resurrection was not invented, but inherited, reframed, preserved under new names. The seed of rebirth was already there, waiting in Egypt centuries before the Church could never openly ban the Book of the Dead, but it could soften it, reframe it, dismiss it as allegory. And for centuries that worked. Until now. Until we began translating again with clearer eyes, and what we've uncovered is startling. The resurrection spells don't contradict Christianity. They mirror it, which forces an unsettling question. Maybe this story was never about one religion at all. Maybe the cycle of death, judgment, and renewal is older than Scripture. Maybe it lives inside us, whispered across cultures, carried in myth, and perhaps Egypt was simply the first to carve it in stone. Most of us picture alchemy as dusty men hunched over furnaces, hoping to turn lead into gold. But in ancient Egypt, it was far more profound. Gold was not the goal, the soul was. Priests taught that existence was layered, body, mind, and spirit. To truly transform, you had to touch all three. When they spoke of lead becoming gold, they weren't just describing metal, they were describing people, refining the heavy and ignorant into something radiant, awakened, eternal. Alchemy was a spiritual science. Its symbols, the serpent, the lotus, the sun, were stages of inner change. Lead meant darkness and unawareness. Gold meant illumination. In rituals, priests used color, sound, and even scent to guide that transformation. It wasn't about wealth. It was about rebirth. And this terrified the early church, because here was a system that connected people to the divine directly. No baptism, no confession, no priest required, just self-refinement, burning away the false, to reveal the true. That kind of independence was dangerous. So alchemy was branded pagan, then heretical, then forbidden. But it never disappeared. Behind monastery doors, Christian mystics secretly studied Egyptian texts. They borrowed fragments, weaving ideas of purification and fire into their theology. But stripped away Egypt's name, publicly alchemy became a joke, a failed science. But its roots never lied. Even the word alchemy comes from chem, the black fertile soil of the Nile. The Greeks added al, and through the Islamic world, the knowledge passed west. Its origins buried, but not lost. Some believe Egyptian alchemy sought not only to purify the soul, but to spark something dormant within the body, an energy that could awaken new senses, perhaps even bend reality itself. Call it magic, call it power. But maybe Egypt's greatest treasure wasn't metal at all. It was a map of transformation, not a hunt for gold, but a search for light. And perhaps what the church truly feared wasn't people striking it rich. It was people waking up. Now imagine this. A torchlit chamber, walls alive with sacred carvings. A priest leans over the embalmed body of a noble. In his hand, a sacred tool of stone. He gently touches the lips, not to mourn, but to restore. This was the opening of the mouth, one of Egypt's most sacred rites, and one of the Vatican's deepest fears. To the Egyptians, death was not an ending, but a crossing. Yet the soul could not pass without senses intact. Eyes to see, ears to hear, a voice to speak. Without words, a spirit was lost. unable to name itself, unable to defend itself, unable to call to the gods. The ritual gave the dead their voice back. It was no metaphor. Priests believed it worked through chants, incense, sacred tools, and long ceremonies. The mouth was opened with precision. The final words were not prayers, but commands. Rise, speak, remember. To them it was compassion. To the Vatican, it was heresy. Early Christian scholars, upon reading it, were horrified. Restoring speech to the dead looked like necromancy. And scripture was clear. Only God held power over life and death. Here was a ritual thousands of years old that claimed otherwise. So it was branded satanic. Priests were accused of summoning demons. Translations were suppressed. Scholars risked exile for studying it. Public sermons held it up as proof of pagan corruption. But perhaps the real threat wasn't demons. It was knowledge. The Egyptians understood something about memory, spirit, and the soul that bypassed Christian teaching. Today we know the opening of the mouth was part of a larger spiritual science, a way to help the soul move forward, a way to preserve identity through the spoken word. And maybe that was what frightened the church most. Because if the dead could speak, what truths might they reveal? Stories older than the Bible, older than Rome, older than silence itself. Before churches rose, before Latin hymns echoed, there was Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom. To Egypt he wasn't just divine. He was the mind behind magic, the keeper of time, the writer of creation's first word. His priests weren't mere temple attendants. They were guardians of cosmic knowledge, working in secrecy among scrolls and symbols. They believed writing itself could alter reality. But as Christianity spread, that knowledge became a target. The spells of Thoth spoke of calling back the dead, mapping the stars, unlocking hidden vision. To the church, this was sorcery, too close to forbidden power. So temples fell, scrolls burned, priests erased. Thoth himself was painted as a demon in disguise. And yet not all was lost. Some priests buried texts in caves, others cloaked teachings in Greek. Fragments slipped into philosophy, into alchemy, into mysticism. Even now, whispers of Thoth survive. Some say the Vatican holds scrolls naming him directly, locked away beneath Rome, studied but never shared, because the truth his priests carried was dangerous, that knowledge itself was sacred, that to learn was to worship. That truth-seeking could bring one closer to the divine, a message too powerful for any institution to control. And so Thoth's name was buried, not because it was false, but because it remembered too much. Look up at the stars. To us they're distant suns. To Egypt, they were a language, patterns that spoke, and among their most powerful symbols was the serpent, sliding through constellations, carved into temple ceilings, not as decoration, but instruction. Serpents meant energy, transformation, passage between realms. Priests aligned rituals with stars, built temples to capture beams of starlight on sacred days, whispered stellar names during healing spells. These weren't superstitions. They were systems. The sky charged the rites. But Christianity taught the stars were separate from God. To look to them was paganism, blasphemy. So serpent and star knowledge was suppressed, renamed serpent worship, twisted into evil, and yet traces slipped through. The serpent on the cross, the crown of stars around Mary, even Christmas timed with solstice alignment, Egyptian sky magic, hidden in plain sight. Modern science has confirmed Egyptian astronomy was astonishingly precise. They tracked Sirius with accuracy that still stuns. But the true secrets weren't just numbers. They were experiences. What they saw, what they felt during alignment, what awakened within them. That part was never written, passed only in whispers. In ritual, the Egyptians weren't simply watching stars, they were conversing with them. And perhaps the Vatican still isn't ready to admit what those voices once revealed. Open the Bible, and you'll see familiar stories. A child in a basket, a God who dies and returns, water turned to blood, darkness covering the land. But if you peel back the layers past Latin, past Greek, even past Hebrew, you arrive in Egypt. Egypt told these stories first. Divine births, cosmic floods, Magic words shaping the world. To them, these weren't myths, they were memory, instruction, truth preserved on papyrus, hidden in temple libraries. As Christianity spread, it absorbed pieces of these older myths, some adapted, some renamed, some buried so deeply you'd never recognize their origin. Unless you knew Horus, born of Isis, after she reassembled Osiris, a miraculous child guarded by divine power, growing to battle darkness and restore order, a story carved 1,000 years before the Gospels, and yet familiar, or Moses raised in Egypt, confronting Pharaoh, wielding a staff that becomes a serpent, splitting waters. These aren't coincidences, they're fingerprints, Egyptian echoes repurposed. But the church couldn't afford comparisons. They couldn't admit the 10 Commandments mirrored spells from the Book of the Dead, or that the judgment of the heart in the Hall of Mart was an older blueprint for the Last Judge. So Egypt was branded a land of idols, of false gods, its scrolls labeled heresy, its stories twisted into warnings. Yet the echoes never fully died. Read carefully, and you can still hear an older rhythm beneath certain psalms, the cadence of Nile priests, the pulse of Sun Temple, a language that once described eternity, not as promise but as fact. The Bible didn't appear out of nothing. It was born from a chain of voices, and Egypt's was one of the first, a voice the church tried to silence, yet one still whispering, if you know where to listen. And in the heart of Vatican City, surrounded by saints and marble, stands a reminder, a 4,000-year-old Egyptian obelisk. It came from Heliopolis, the city of the sun. Once it stood proudly in Ra's temple, a sacred needle of stone honoring the sun god himself. Now it towers in the heart of the Vatican. Tourists pass it daily. They pose for photos, maybe wonder why it's there, but never ask the deeper question. Because this monument isn't just decoration. It's a message, a survivor, a relic from a time when Egypt held the keys to the stars and the soul. And the Vatican didn't merely take it, they planted it with purpose, set it directly above something hidden. The obelisk reached Rome long before Christianity's rise. Roman emperors hauled it across seas as a symbol of conquest. But when the church took power, instead of tearing it down, they preserved it. Centuries later, in the 1500s, something curious happened. They dug beneath it, they shifted its alignment. They performed a secret rite before raising it again. Then they redesigned the entire square around it. Why? Some say it's nothing more than art, a trophy of history. But others insist otherwise. In Egypt, obelisks were not monuments. They were antennas, spiritual receivers meant to draw divine energy from the heavens down to earth. Their golden tips once blazed with sunlight, marking sacred geometry and amplifying ritual power. So what happens when one is placed at the very center of Christianity's throne? And what rests beneath it? Whispers among researchers suggest there's a vault below, that church engineers uncovered something during the move. Something Egyptian, not Roman, not Christian. Some claim it's a chamber. Others whisper of hidden scrolls, even fragments of the lost writings of Thoth. The Vatican, of course, has never confirmed this. No excavations are allowed. Records are vague at best. But what's undeniable is the church's obsession with keeping that stone aligned perfectly centered. Maybe they know exactly what it means. That Christianity didn't erase Egypt, it built on top of it, stone by stone, symbol by symbol, until only this obelisk remained to tell the story. Standing tall, pointing upward, waiting. Because some memories refuse to stay buried. Most people think censorship belongs to governments, dictators, or banned books. But history hides a quieter kind of silencing. One of the most powerful bans ever wasn't about politics. It was about translation, a decree buried in church archives, still valid today. Its purpose was simple, to ensure certain Egyptian writings were never read again. It's called the Seal of Silence. Few know it exists. That's the point. Issued centuries ago, whispered to bishops and archivists. Not to the public. It carried a blacklist of forbidden manuscripts, scrolls that spoke of resurrection rituals, cosmic laws, sacred geometry, and memory. To Egyptians, these weren't myths. They were tools. To the Vatican, they were threats. The problem was simple. For centuries the church controlled the narrative. They decided which stories were holy and which were heresy. But the Egyptian papyri refused to play along. They spoke of souls crossing stargates, of magic not as evil but divine, and worst of all they echoed Christian ideas only written long before Christianity itself. So the order came: silence them. At first it was easy. Hieroglyphs were a dead language. No one could read them. But in the 1800s, when scholars like Champollion cracked the code, alarms rang. Suddenly the old scrolls spoke again. That's when the seal resurfaced. Church-approved translators worked under restrictions. Some passages were cut, others buried in footnotes or mislabeled entirely. Independent scholars who revealed too much found their careers blocked. Libraries locked their most dangerous collections behind permissions few could get. Even now, certain manuscripts remain stamped with silence. Why so much effort? Because the church feared what these texts could unleash. Not monsters, not curses. Ideas, questions, possibilities. That maybe history isn't as clean as we're told. That perhaps Christianity's roots reached not only to Jerusalem, but also to Memphis and Thebes, to Egypt's temples where priests once spoke to stars and called it prayer. The seal of silence isn't just censorship, it's control, a barrier keeping the past as a whisper, one we're still not meant to hear. Fast forward to the 1600s, Europe wrestled with theology and power, and quietly a group of Jesuits boarded a ship bound for Egypt. Officially they were missionaries. In truth, their mission was far older. They weren't going to convert, they were going to recover, to seek something the Vatican had tracked for centuries. Their expedition was never meant to be known. Only fragments survive, coded letters, erased names, a single report sealed away, but pieced together, a story emerging. They weren't looking for pyramids or familiar ruins. They had older maps, sketches of temples no European had seen, and orders to locate the lost library. Not the Library of Alexandria, that was ashened memory, but another archive, hidden in the desert before the flood. A sanctuary where priests stored forbidden texts, scrolls of astronomy, resurrection rites, spells said to transform the soul itself, and some believe the Jesuits found it. A journal hints at a hidden stairway, at walls blackened with strange carvings, then silence. A month of missing entry. When writing resumed, the tone was different, panicked, fearful. One phrase repeated again and again: "We must not bring it back." The mission collapsed. Some priests returned, others vanished completely. The Vatican denied it ever happened. Records burned, maps erased. Why? Because perhaps they discovered something too dangerous. Symbols that matched early Christian visions, rituals that mirrored sacraments, a path to salvation that bypassed the church itself, knowledge that could not be controlled. The expedition was buried, not forgotten, just hid. But clues surface even now. A coded map at auction, strange symbols resurfacing in seminaries, enough to keep the question alive. What did they really find out there? And why is the silence louder than any sermon? Hidden deep in the Vatican Library is another mystery. A parchment map that shouldn't exist. Not Latin, not biblical, Egyptian, drawn with care, but showing temples no modern record lists. Found in the 1800s within a Jesuit archive, it came with a ciphered journal. Most dismissed it as forgery, but one monk studied it and realized the landmarks shifted. The Nile, yes. The pyramids, yes. But further south were complexes unknown. Temples circled in red. In the margins a single Latin word, tes, be silent. Why mark them? Some believe these were sanctuaries, where priests stored their deepest mysteries. Rituals even pharaohs spoke of only in whispers. Legends speak of a hall built with sound, a temple of mirrors, even a god-king who never died. Modern expeditions to these sites, but satellite scans reveal strange patterns, grids, buried structures. Requests to excavate have been denied. The Vatican won't comment. The map has since vanished back into archives, though copies exist. Perhaps it isn't just about lost temple. Perhaps it's about truths the church couldn't afford to surface. Then came the earthquake. A crack split a catacomb in Rome, revealing a sealed chamber unknown to records. Inside a golden sarcophagus, its carvings, not Christian, Egyptian, The Vatican sealed it within hours, but whispers slipped out. The body inside was mummified with precision, organs removed, amulets in place, buried with a dagger to Thoth, a statue of Osiris, and fragments of a scroll. What was an Egyptian burial doing beneath a Christian city? Some say it was smuggled during crusades. Others believe it was no king at all, but a priest, a keeper of rites that blurred resurrection and reincarnation. The scroll fragments speak of a bridge of breath and a gate of stars beneath the blacks, phrases that echo both the Book of the Dead and early Christian texts later erased. Perhaps it was evidence of a pact, a merging of Egyptian and Christian ideas. The catacombs themselves are filled with imagery suspiciously Egyptian, winged figures, serpents, sun, but the body was hidden, because proof is dangerous, proof that Egypt's rituals weren't destroyed but absorbed, that resurrection wasn't invented by Christianity, it was inherited. And maybe the Vatican's greatest fear wasn't the corpse beneath their feet, it was the memories he might awake. Most of the notes looked harmless, simple translations, passing comments, but scattered among them were strange entries, mentions of Egyptian gods written by name, descriptions of rituals meant to summon angels, hints of knowledge said to descend from the temples of Thoth. In one margin, a prayer appeared to be about Jesus, yet its structure mirrored an older Egyptian spell from the Book of the Dead. Why would monks risk writing such things? Because not all of them fully obeyed the church. Some had studied in Alexandria, others had access to ancient manuscripts before they were destroyed. They believed knowledge, no matter the source, was sacred. When ordered to burn it, some chose a different path. They hid it. Egyptian spells disguised as Christian prayer, magical formulas buried inside Bible verses, the names of gods hidden within Latin acrostics. On the surface, holy words, but between the lines, secrets waited. One 9th century manuscript prays to a light bringer who passes through 12 gates. That phrase doesn't exist in the Bible, but it does in Egyptian funerary texts. Another scroll holds what seems like a Christian mandala, yet closer inspection reveals a star map tracing Sirius and Orion, the twin beacons of Egypt's sky law. Some monks even used invisible ink. Recipes for it whispered in cloisters. Lemon juice, vinegar, even blood. Heat revealed the words. Others wrote in mirror script or coded alphabets. To ordinary eyes the parchment looked harmless. To the initiated, it was a vault. Eventually the church noticed. Monasteries were raided, scrolls seized, monks accused of heresy, some silenced, some burned, others disappeared. The surviving manuscripts were locked away or destroyed, but not all. A few escaped, smuggled into private collections, hidden in university archives, still waiting for someone able to read between the lines. Because in those margins lies a parallel history, a history where faith and magic were not enemies, but companions. Most people have never heard of the Index Librorum Prohibitorum. The name sounds like something from a fantasy novel, but it was the Vatican's official blacklist of forbidden books, pages no Christian was allowed to read, thoughts no one was permitted to think. For 4 centuries it grew, silently but steadily, and buried within its lists were Egyptian texts, ancient spells, sacred scrolls, translations that had survived fire and desert, only to be erased with ink. These weren't demonic curses. Many were prayers to the sun, meditations for healing the soul, maps of the afterlife written millennia before the Bible. But the church didn't see wisdom. They saw competition. They clashed with the Christian timeline. They told stories the Vatican did not want told, so they were silent. One of the most feared was the Book of Thoth, said to contain magical teachings, unlocking the language of the gods. It wasn't merely banned, it was hunted, copies tracked down and burned. Even references to it in other writings were censored. Yet fragments survived, hidden in museum basements, smuggled into private libraries, written in codes only a few could understand. Across many copies, a warning was scrawled: do not translate, do not share, do not awake. Another banned work was the Book of Coming Forth by Day, what we now call the Egyptian Book of the Dead. It described the weighing of the heart, judgment before divine beings, the soul's journey into eternity, too close to revelation, too close for comfort. Parts of it echoed the Bible, sometimes word for word. Then there were the medical papyri, Egyptian texts that wove herbs and chants into healing. To them the body and soul were treated together. To the church that was unacceptable. These manuscripts were branded heretical, even though some contained remedies. Modern science later confirmed, the index was never just about books. It was about controlling the story, erasing alternate paths, making history appear clean, linear, and officially the list was abolished in the 1960s. Yet certain texts never reappeared. They remain forbidden, not because they are evil, but because they still hold the power to disrupt the church's narrative. And so they remain sealed, waiting in the shadow. Then there is the figure who stands at the center of it all, Hermes Trismegistus, the Thrace Great. To the Greeks he was Hermes, to the Egyptians he was Thoth, the god of wisdom and sacred right. To mystery schools and secret orders, he was both man and god, a messenger of divine knowledge. His words, preserved in the Hermetica, spoke of the soul, the stars and the hidden unity of all things. At first Renaissance scholars embraced these. They thought they predated Moses, maybe even the Bible itself. That made them ancient, respectable, safe. The church tolerated them, until scholars uncovered the truth. The Hermetic writings were Egyptian, older than Christianity, perhaps even inspiring it. Suddenly they weren't philosophy, they were rivals. So the church acted. Translators softened phrases, ideas of divine balance, male and female, spirit and matter, were rewritten into patriarchal tones. References to reincarnation and cosmic unity were edited out. Hermes himself was downgraded to myth. A composite mistake, convenient, erase the messenger, weaken the message. But the words survived, hidden in symbols, in star maps, in temple walls. The Hermetica still whispers that everything is connected, that the divine is not locked in a single church, but written into the universe itself. Perhaps that is why the Vatican worked so hard to bury it, because it doesn't just challenge their theology, it challenges their claim to history itself. And then an even stranger tale. In the ruins of a monastery in the desert, archaeologists uncovered a half-burned scroll, written in Coptic. It didn't match the Bible. Instead it told of a priest, part sorcerer, part Christian, who walked between two traditions. He spoke Christ's words and invoked Thoth spells. He healed the sick with prayers and chants. He believed the Nile and the Jordan flowed from the same divine source, that Osiris and Christ both conquered death. Scholars called it the sorcerer's gospel, not officially, only in whispers. It was too dangerous to acknowledge openly, because it suggested the earliest Christians didn't reject Egyptian magic. They embraced it, they built upon it, they hid it inside their rituals. Communion, baptism, meditation, all with echoes of older rites. That scroll vanished soon after discovery. Some say the Vatican purchased it under false pretenses. Others believe it was seized in an operation disguised as archaeology. The monastery burned mysteriously. A year later, the monks disappeared. The gospel became rumor, a ghost of a text. But fragments remain, lines scribbled in the margins of other forbidden works, symbols appearing in both Egyptian tombs and Christian catacombs, enough to hint that it was real. If ever recovered, it would rewrite Christianity, not as a break from Egypt, but as its continuation. That is why it had to vanish. And then there is the Vatican's secret museum, a place not on maps, not open to tours, known only to a handful. It is not a museum at all, but a vault. Behind locked doors lie objects the church dares not destroy, but cannot display. Amulets with fading hieroglyphs, scrolls wrapped in black cloth, statues of gods with animal heads, mirrors said to reveal visions in forgotten time. Among the whispered artifacts, a black stone tablet, polished like glass, inscribed in golden symbols that glow under moonlight, said not to map land but time itself. Its timeline doesn't match ours. Those who studied it either vanished or went mad. Another relic, a serpent-engraved ring, kept in a lead box passed from pope to pope, never worn. Legend says if it returns to its temple, a cycle of awakening begins. This vault is not about preservation, it's about containment, because some knowledge terrifies even those who rule by it. And then deepest of all, a cedar and silver box containing a parchment, about a name erased from Egypt's walls. Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh, the one who worshipped a single god when all others prayed to many. His reign was followed by plague, strange death, people collapsing with pale skin and clouded eyes. The document calls it the shadow of the sun disk. It records outbreaks across centuries, linking them to his name. Why would the Vatican guard such a record? Because Akhenaten wasn't just a king. He may have spoken to something beyond human. Some called it the sun, others whispered it was something older, not of this world. When explorers in the 1800s uncovered a sealed box near his ruined city, they found a tablet with writing no one could decipher. The man who opened it was dead within 3 days, and so it was taken, locked away, another piece of a history we're never meant to read. Fever, hemorrhaging. His assistants went blind. The box was shipped to Rome quietly, no records, no headlines. The Vatican locked it away and attached 3 warnings, written only in an internal memo. Do not repeat his name too often. Do not read the tablet aloud. Do not place his image in sunlight. Only a handful of exorcists were permitted to see it. Some whispered it wasn't just a disease, that what followed Akhenaten wasn't medical at all, but spiritual, that his god wasn't symbolic but a presence still listening. Researchers who probed too deeply into him began to vanish or stopped abruptly. One priest was discovered in Cairo, his notes burned, his tongue cut out. Another locked himself inside a monastery and never spoke again. He only wrote one sentence repeatedly: "He returns when we forget why we buried him." Maybe that's why his statues were defaced, his name erased. Maybe the curse wasn't Egyptian at all. Maybe it still stirs silent, patient, waiting to be called back. And maybe the Vatican knows that time is drawing near. Deep in their vaults lies a papyrus almost no one speaks of. It isn't listed in any catalogue, and no photographs exist. Yet it's real, fragile, folded, preserved in glass. Those few who've glimpsed it call it the scroll of light, not because it shines, but because of what it describes. It speaks of a living force, not metaphor, not poetry, a divine energy flowing through all things, perceptible, transferable, awakenable, not simply worship, but activation. The scroll outlines precise methods, postures, tones, geometries, frequencies, rituals to unlock the vessel of light within the human body. One line reads, "He who speaks the word with truth becomes the Son made flesh." Vatican scholars reportedly grew uneasy at that. Too close, too familiar, too much like incarnation, a God made man. But this was written over 1,000 years before anyone ever wrote about Christ. That's where the danger begins. Because if it's true, divine energy wasn't limited to one man or one era. It was universal, accessible. The Egyptians taught that every human carried it, and through discipline, not faith alone, anyone could awaken it. The text even lists stages: awakening, purification, ascent, not a sermon, but a manual. Illustrated diagrams show human forms encircled with waves of light, patterns etched in sacred geometry, circles within circles, tracing how the current flowed through body and cosmos. Some glyphs mirror symbols later seen in Hermetic scrolls and early alchemical texts, but this one is older, raw, undiluted. That's why it was hidden, not destroyed, studied quietly but never shared, because its message is devastating. The temple is the self, the altar is the heart, and the light has always been within. No priesthood required, no institution needed. And if people truly believed that, what would happen to the church? In the late 1800s, a man few remember walked those halls. Not a bishop, not a pope, just a cleric tasked with cataloguing the vault. His name was Father Luca Verno. They called him the keeper. His vault wasn't guarded by keys alone. It was buried beneath stone, its walls lined with gold leaf, its silence absolute. The objects he tended weren't holy relics of saints. They were older, stranger, a falcon-engraved ring that never tarnished, a vial of oil that burned without flame, a stone covered in both hieroglyphs and Coptic spells, and at its center a fractured mirror, said to have belonged to a priestess of Isis. When the light struck just right, it revealed not a reflection but something else. At first Verno was loyal. He never questioned, never faltered, until the whispers began. He recorded them in his journal, murmurs from behind the vault door, dreams heavy with alien symbols, a presence that grew stronger with every entry. His letters, written only to himself, asked questions the Vatican never answered. Why preserve these things instead of destroying them? Why did some objects seem to shift when no one was watching? Was the vault a tomb or a prison? His last note contained only 4 words. It followed me home. 2 days later he was found dead. No wounds, no sign of struggle, just a symbol drawn in ash on the floor, one that no scholar, ancient or modern, could identify. The room was sealed, the vault reassigned, now guarded by 2 exorcists. Yet not all items remained. Some had vanished. The Vatican said nothing. They didn't even acknowledge Verno's existence. But whispers spread among staff. Maybe he went mad. Maybe he used one of the relics. Or maybe it used him. From that point forward, no one was ever allowed inside the vault alone. The keeper had become the warning, and the vault remained what it always was, a wound, sealed with silence. Somewhere deep in the archives sits another anomaly. Old reels of magnetic tape, unmarked, save for one word, Coptic, on the back of one box in faded handwriting. Do not play in solitude. But in the 1950s, someone, a young Jesuit scholar, Matteo Morelli, fluent in Greek, studying Coptic, fascinated by Egypt's early Christian mysteries, he slipped a reel into the player. What he heard wasn't music, not prayer. He described it as a slow rhythmic chant. No melody, no words, only a pattern, like breath, like waves. He said it bypassed his ears, spoke directly to the inside of his mind. He stopped after 5 minutes. That night he woke screaming in a language no one recognized. Clicks, hisses, pauses. His roommate swore the room turned icy cold, the kind that burrows into bone. Morelli himself remembered nothing, but over the days that followed, he changed, ate little, slept in fragments, wrote compulsively in half Latin, half Coptic, laced with symbols unknown to any scholar. He claimed the voice on the tape had shown him a path of light through darkness. Older than Scripture, older than Egypt. The Vatican stepped in, his notes confiscated, the reels sealed again, coded under a new classification. Officially, Morelli was sent on sabbatical. Unofficially, he vanished. Archivists whispered that the tapes were recorded decades earlier in a monastery in Upper Egypt, where monks practiced a hidden form of sound magic chants, not meant to worship, but to unlock patterns designed to stir something in the subconscious, frequencies that bend memory, emotion, thought. That's why the Vatican locked them away, not because they were holy, but because they worked. To this day, no one plays them. They remain wrapped in protective cloth, sealed in silence, because some words are meant to be read, some spoken, but a few, just a few, are meant to be heard. And once you hear them, they never leave you. The Inquisition never ended. It simply changed uniforms. Today they are called the Custodes Umbrae, keepers of the shadow. They don't burn heretics in public square. They operate quietly, erasing things that do not belong in the modern world, but somehow keep surfacing. When a cursed Egyptian relic washes ashore, when a lost manuscript starts whispering to its readers, these are the ones the Vatican calls. They are priests, but not the kind who lead Sunday Mass. They are polyglots, trained in dead languages, initiates, who memorized prayers not spoken for 1,000 years. Some were trained in monasteries that don't appear on maps, others by mystics whose lineages trace back to the temples of Thoth. They travel without collars, they carry no crosses, but always, always they wear something hidden, a sigil, a relic, an old charm, because what they face is not safe. One mission report, buried under highest classification, tells of a book in a private French library. The landowner swore it, whispered to him. A team of 5 agents was dispatched. 4 returned. They filed their report. No details, only silence. The 5th was never spoken of again. The Vatican claims these agents are protectors, keeping dangerous knowledge out of the wrong hands. But others say they are silencers, that some texts don't just get sealed, they get erased. Rumors go further. Some agents change. One supposedly stopped aging. Another lost his sight, yet described events unfolding miles away, unconfirmed, unproved. But the files are full of redacted names and quiet warnings. In the age of satellites and digital records, you'd think magic would be gone. But it hasn't vanished. It hides. And the Vatican knows. That's why the old system was never dismantled, only updated. Because this isn't about belief, it's about control. And some words, no matter how old, still hold power. In 1974, that power surfaced again. A case file marked anomalous healing. Most entries were hoaxes, glowing relics, bubbling holy water. But one was different, not because of the miracle, but because of who witnessed it. A Jesuit medical observer in Cairo was summoned to a monastery near Asyut. An 8-year-old boy was dying. His lungs collapsed. No treatment worked. His family had surrendered to faith. Then an old monk appeared, one who hadn't been seen in years. He carried a scroll, wrapped in black cloth, sealed with wax older than the monastery itself. The writing wasn't Arabic, Coptic or Greek. The symbols coiled like vines, glowing faintly in candlelight. The monk read for hours, his voice steady, forceful. At certain passages he touched the boy's chest. The room grew heavy, as if the walls themselves were listening. By the end the boy opened his eyes, coughed once, sat up. His fever was gone. Within a day he was walking. The Jesuit documented everything. Photograph notes, snippets of the chant. He sent it all to Rome. And that's when the silence began. The scroll disappeared. The monk vanished. The monastery denied it ever happened. The Jesuit was reassigned to Brazil. But he left behind a hidden letter. In it he explained what he believed. The ritual hadn't just healed the body. It had severed something, an illness not born of flesh, but attached from elsewhere. From something not human. The Vatican's official report dismissed it. But behind closed doors, the scroll became part of a secret study. Only 3 scholars were permitted to see it. One ended in a hospital, plagued by visions of radiant beings. Another abandoned the church and disappeared. The third left only a single note in the margin. The word still carries charge. The Vatican never destroyed that scroll. It sits in their vault to this day, not burned, not erased, because they know it still holds something they don't fully understand, and to them that is far more dangerous. Because if one scroll could cure the incurable, what else have they buried? And who decides what the world is allowed to remember? His name was Father Lucien Morelli. A quiet priest in southern Italy, obedient, unremarkable, the kind you'd never expect to break from tradition, until the day he did. Hidden in the church basement, behind a false brick wall, he found it, an Egyptian scroll, no records, no labels, just sitting there like it had been waiting. The parchment shimmered in candlelight, the ink moving as if it breathed. At first glance, it looked like a prayer for safe journeys, but the longer he read, the clearer it became. It wasn't about travel. It was about sight, not through eyes, but something deeper, an inner vision. The ritual seemed deceptively simple. Light a candle, hang a mirror on the wall, draw a circle around it, speak the words. One warning stood out, written in red: do not ask to see your own time. That was exactly what he did. The official Vatican files never described what happened next, but scraps survived. Notes from the local bishop, testimonies from nuns, a single letter from a Vatican investigator. They all described the same moment. The room fell unnaturally still. The candle flame froze without flicker. The air pressed inward, as though the walls themselves wanted to escape. Then the mirror went black, not like darkness, but like absence. Father Morelli whispered one sentence before the mirror shattered. They lied about the beginning. From that day on, he was broken. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping. He spoke in riddles, dates that never existed, names erased from history, stories no one could verify. His fingernails carved symbols into the plaster, markings that matched the scroll exactly. Rome sent him to a hospital. The church was sealed. The scroll was burned, or so they claimed. But the mirror was not destroyed. It was quietly transferred into the Vatican's secret archive. There it was filed under a single word: speculum. Whispers say that if you stare too long into that mirror today, it doesn't show your reflection. It shows something else. Not the future, not the past, but a memory that isn't yours. The Vatican denies the incident ever happened, but the file speculum still exists, classified, untouchable. Because glimpsing the future is dangerous, but glimpsing the truth behind time, that can drive even the faithful insane. They didn't call it magic, not at first. In Vatican memos, it was politely labeled auditory distortion phenomena, but those who encountered it knew exactly what it was. A sound not meant to survive. It began with a wax cylinder in Alexandria. Jesuit archives. The label scratched in Latin, "Do not play aloud." The warning came too late. The scholar who found it couldn't read Latin. He played it. 2 minutes in he collapsed. When he awoke he claimed he'd left his body. He described colors outside the visible spectrum. He spoke in a tongue no one recognized. The Vatican took him away. The cylinder was sealed in a soundproof vault. Copies were made not on tape, not digital. Those failed, causing electrical surges, overheated equipment, and in one case temporary deafness. So the church's own labs preserved it magnetically, outside modern systems. What did the chant say? That part no one agrees on. Scholars detected fragments of Coptic, traces of late Egyptian. Its rhythm was hypnotic. Its pitch measured at 1100 Marvan Hertz. Strangely, that's the same frequency linked to meditation rituals designed to simulate near-death states. In that state, belief doesn't just influence perception, it creates it. Suggestion becomes conviction. Conviction becomes reality. That terrified the church, because if sound alone could induce communion with the divine, why would anyone need priests, or scripture, or ritual? A single chant could do what centuries of doctrine could not. So they tried to bury it. But versions leaked. An artist sampled it unknowingly. A mislabeled track appeared on an obscure website. Listeners reported dreams of temples, out-of-body journeys, whispers that said, "This is how we remembered." Today, deep inside a Vatican facility known only by its codename Aquila, priests and scientists sit side by side. They don't pray, they listen, over and over, watching brain scans, charting the unexplainable, because somewhere long ago, someone discovered that sound itself was a key, not music, not worship, a door, and now, it's opening again. They once called it the language of heaven, pure sound, voices of angels, but when linguists examined apocryphal texts, they noticed words that didn't fit Greek, Hebrew, or Aramaic, words that felt older, Egyptian. It wasn't coincidence. The so-called angelic names mirrored inscriptions from Karnak and Abid. The rhythm and syllables matched Egyptian temple invocations. The only difference was what they summoned. Egyptians called upon Thoth and Isis. Christians rebranded them as angels. Even the Book of Enoch describes angels speaking in an incomprehensible tongue. When analyzed by software, its phonetics aligned eerily with Egyptian funerary spells. Spells meant to guide souls through the underworld. But here those words were guiding souls into heaven. The overlap was too dangerous. If angels spoke the same language as Egyptian gods, maybe they came from the same source. Maybe divine revelation wasn't unique at all, but part of a much older network of sound, geometry and vibration. So the evidence was buried, misfiled, labeled heresy. Still traces remain. A Coptic gospel, hidden in the archives, contains a chant nearly identical to one from the Litany of the Eye. It speaks of vision beyond sight, of beings of radiant light. Egyptians called them narrow-winged intelligences. The church called them angels. Ancient scrolls from Syrian monasteries depict these beings descending on beams of light. Their wings weren't feathered, but geometric, like symbols carved into obelisks. Their names were not Michael or Gabriel, but echoes of Mahat and Horus. And so the question remains, if the voices of heaven and the voices of Egypt are the same, what does that mean for faith? One saint holds a clue. Saint Cyrenus, canonized in the 12th century, a shadowy figure, honored quietly in Spain and North Africa. His miracles were unlike others. He healed not with prayer, but with symbols drawn in dirt, with chants monks refused to translate, with whispered words into water that cured the dying. Those words were Egyptian. In one preserved manuscript, a small sketch of an ankh sits in the margin, with a Latin note beneath. He used this to speak to the dead. Later scribes tried to erase it. Modern spectral analysis revealed the line was authentic. The Vatican had a choice: admit they had canonized a magician, or rewrite his history. They chose the latter. His incantations became ecstatic prayers, his spell circles became holy focus, his chants became divine blessings. But fragments tell a different story. His cloak embroidered not with crosses, but with stars and serpents, his training traced back not to Rome, but to Alexandria. Some claimed he was a priest of Thoth, before he ever heard of Christ. It worked, people were healed, storms were calm, and Rome tolerated it, until it became inconvenient. Now with forbidden texts resurfacing, his sainthood is under review, because if one saint's miracles were Egyptian spells, how many others were too? Maybe the line between miracle and magic was never a line at all, and deep beneath the Vatican sits a black stone tablet. Small, silent, covered in Egyptian glyphs, it glows faintly in the dark, soft golden, alive. In 1973, security notes described its light pulsing in rhythm with nearby voices. Scholars compared its carvings to the Book of the Dead. They matched stroke for stroke, even the damaged edges aligned with fragments found centuries earlier. The Book of the Dead isn't a story, it's a manual. Instructions for the soul's journey. The glowing stone wasn't art, it was activation. A Vatican physicist examined it in his private notes later leaked, describe luminescence without energy source, and glyphs reactive to thought patterns. That last phrase was crossed out in red ink. He resigned a month later. Access to the stone is now restricted to 2 cardinals, but custodians whisper of golden light seeping through cracks in the floorboards. Late at night. Is it alien, Atlantean, or something simpler? The Egyptians believed words and symbols carried power, that divine essence could be trapped in stone. If that's true, then the tablet isn't a relic, it's still alive, and the question remains, if it answers prayer, who is answering back? In 1972, a vault sealed for 4 centuries was opened. Its door was lead-lined, marked with symbols older than Latin or Greek. At 11:42 a.m., 6 men entered, 3 guards, 2 scholars and 1 priest. The seal was broken, the lock turned, the door swung open, and then 12 minutes of silence. The security logs cut out. No one knows what they found. When the cameras finally flickered back on, the hallway was empty. No voices, no movement, no sign of the team, only an open vault door, yawning into silence. Minutes later, one guard stumbled out. He didn't speak, he only sobbed. His uniform was shredded, scorched as though he had walked through fire, yet there was no flame, no smoke, no heat. Doctors reported his body was stable, no burns, no broken bones, except for one detail. His pupils, perfect 5-pointed stars. He was sedated, moved to a private wing, and placed under constant watch. He survived only 3 days, not from injury, but thirst. He refused every drink offered to him, whispering that only water blessed by holy hands was safe. The rest of the team never emerged. Inside the vault, nothing but dust. No relics, no scrolls, no artifacts, at least nothing visible. But one of the guards who reviewed the footage claimed the shadows didn't line up with the light. Shapes moved across the wall as though something invisible stepped into the room, then stepped out. By 12:05, the vault was sealed again. Permanently. That same afternoon, the Pope signed an emergency decree, handwritten, urgent. It declared that a breach of sacred silence had occurred, and ordered the passage consecrated every 40 days. Since then, no one has been allowed inside. Cameras were removed, sensors disconnected, the door was resealed, and above it, new words were carved into the stone. In Coptic they translate to say, "Here ends the voice of the old gods." Whispers from the inside suggest the church believes something escaped, not a person, not an object, a presence, ancient, a fragment of mind older than history. Some call it a curse, others, a consciousness. Whatever it was once trapped, it was free. And once free, the line between our world and theirs was gone. To the public, the vault was dismissed as rumor. But for those 12 minutes, for those men, it became something else. A warning carved in silence. Some doors are sealed for a reason, and yet it always begins the same way. A missing page, a whispered chant, a candle lit at the wrong hour. Nobody declares their intent. They simply vanish into forbidden rooms, memorize fragments of fading ink, and something stirs. The Vatican never acknowledges it officially, but buried in restricted files are patterns, symbols repeating, voices unexplainable, flames that leave no act. In 1983, a French monk was discovered unconscious beneath a monastery crypt. Circles of ash surrounded him, drawn in soot from incense no one had used since the 5th century. Etched into the floor was a single word, not Latin, not Greek, but identical to a glyph from a missing Egyptian scroll once held by the Jesuits. 3 days later he awoke, his memory gone, except for one phrase he repeated again and again. He spoke through the flame. It wasn't the last time that sentence surfaced. In 1997, a group calling themselves the Sons of the Dawn broke into the Vatican's sealed archives. Inside their bags, ritual tools from 3 traditions: Coptic hymns, Egyptian scarabs, and a human bone wrapped in linen soaked in myrrh. Their intent wasn't research, it was reenactment. One confessed under questioning. He claimed they followed instructions left in code by a 17th century monk, a monk who claimed he had spoken with the original light, not a metaphor, a literal presence. Their mission was to open what he called the deep temple, a dimension beneath time itself. To them, Egyptian ritual wasn't myth, it was science, a technology for piercing the veil. But every attempt ends the same: silence, memory loss, madness, death. The Vatican never prosecutes. They arrest, they move the bodies, burn the pages, rewrite the records, but still, attempts continue. In the Italian hills, monks built a hidden chapel underground, stars painted on the ceiling, aligned with the Egyptian calendar. At the center, a symbol of a mouth surrounded by flame, the very glyph once used to awaken the soul after death. Why do they keep trying? Because some believe the veil is thinning, that time itself is bending, and that the ancient chants may work again if spoken at the precise moment. And now, not everyone is asking permission. It began quietly: cryptic posts on obscure forums, then TikToks, low, pulsing beats beneath glowing chants, teenagers filming candlelit rituals, hashtags turning forgotten gods into trends. At first it seemed like a phase, but it spread, faster than anyone expected. They called it chemism, a return to Kemet, the true name of ancient Egypt. Not mummies, not pyramids, but the old gods, the symbols, the spells whispered in tombs. This wasn't play acting. They studied translations of the pyramid texts, mapped lunar cycles, aligned rituals to the stars. Some even claimed dreams where Egyptian deities spoke in voices older than words. Alongside it rose Hermeticism, once hidden teachings, now decoded in Discord chats and Instagram stories. The Emerald Tablet, the Kybalion, ideas that thought shapes reality, that the divine is within, not above. Teenagers quoting Hermes Trismegistus instead of influencers, talking about alchemy of the self. The Vatican noticed. It always notices, especially when history refuses to stay buried. A leaked report from their cultural observatory flagged chemism as theological destabilization. They weren't afraid of magic. They were afraid of questions. Why do Bible stories mirror Egyptian myths? Why are saints described like gods? Why do early Christian texts hide the very practices they condemned? And beneath it all, fear, not of rebellion, but of memory. A memory that might be awakening inside us. Rituals are returning. Candles, symbols, chants spoken under breath. Some who participate claim the air changes, that they feel watched, not by people but by something old. This isn't about rejecting faith. It isn't even about belief. It's about recognition. The feeling that history is incomplete, that something was buried, something taken, and that calling it back might change everything. That is why the Church has always feared Egypt, not the land, the idea, because once remembered, it burns through the illusion that truth is linear, that it belongs to the present. Maybe that's what this new Egypt is. Not a place, a memory refusing to stay forgotten. It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday. St. Peter's Basilica filled with tourists and local. Cameras rolling. The choir finished its hymn. The priest stepped to the altar, but what came from his mouth was not Latin, not Italian. At first, just a slip, a strange syllable, then another. The tone deepened. The air thickened. The sound wasn't understood, but it was felt. Suddenly every microphone cut out. No static, no feedback, just silence. And yet his voice carried, loud, measured, echoing as though the stone itself spoke with him. People clutched their ears, reporting high ringing. Others gasped for breath. Candles flickered. Some swore the light itself bent. A woman fainted. A child cried. One cameraman later swore the live feed froze on a single frame. The priest's eyes white, his mouth open in an endless chant. Then it stopped. He blinked, as if nothing had happened, and continued the mass in flawless Latin. But the room never felt the same again. Afterwards, security rushed him out a side door. He never spoke to anyone. The footage never aired. The press claimed technical difficulties. The technicians swore nothing had failed. The backups were erased. Deliberate. A week later, the priest was reassigned. Remote. Silent. Vanished. Rumors spread. Some said the chant was Coptic. Others recognized fragments of Egyptian resurrection spell. Whispers linked it to a papyrus locked beneath the Vatican library. A scroll said to summon divine presence through sound. Was the priest overtaken by something, or had he found the scroll and spoken it deliberately? No one agrees. Only one detail is certain. Everyone who heard it felt it. A sound too ancient to be named, forgotten by men, remembered by stone. The Vatican never spoke of it again. The priest was never seen again. The scroll remains hidden, because Egyptian magic was never about spectacle, not gold, not storms, but memory, intention, the shaping of reality through alignment with the divine within. Every spell reminded the initiate. The gods were not above, they were inside you, breathing through your voice, moving through your hands. That terrified those who needed control. The church did not dismiss this knowledge. It studied it, quietly, while declaring it evil. It archived the very texts it condemned. Because Egyptian magic was never chaos, it was freedom. If you could commune with the divine yourself, why need a priest? If you could shield your soul with your own words, why need salvation from another? That question still echoes, and it is why they burned scrolls. Erased names rewrote the past, because true freedom is not political, it is spiritual. To the Egyptians, freedom meant unbound, a soul traveling beyond death, a mind carrying light, a body becoming more than flesh. That frightened them more than any demon. Even now the restrictions remain. Scholars denied access, relics sealed in vaults, because they know these ideas are not dead, not because of spells, but because of questions. Questions that erode control. What if the divine is not above, but inside? What if words shape more than sound? What if you were never meant to be small? That is why they feared Egypt, not its shadows, its light, because once remembered, no vault can contain